Hello everyone. This time through we're going to be talking about a new JavaScript topic called functions. Basically what a function is a self-contained block of code that performs some task. Functions can be especially useful in the area of software reuse, in that if we find multiple places within a project or within multiple projects that need to do basically the same thing, multiple chunks of code that are more or less identical, what we can do is we can take those identical chunks of code and we can turn them into functions. That then allows us to have the code that performs that task located in one place. We can then activate it, or what they call that function, from any of the different places where that action needs to actually take place. So instead of having repeated bits of code in our project or our projects, we can have all of it stored in just one place, making it much easier for us to maintain, much easier for us to upgrade, much easier for us to correct if any problems are found with it. The way that functions are actually kind of laid out in JavaScript is that we have built-in functions, which are functions that basically come with JavaScript. They're simply there and available for our use. We can also write what are called custom functions, which are functions of our own creation that we just make up, and they do whatever it is we want them to do, however it is we want them to do it. Functions in a lot of ways are like expressions, because functions will always return a value, so they can be used in JavaScript statements in much the same way that expressions can. Functions in JavaScript are also a type of value, so in a way we're really still just talking about different values or different types of values, different data types that are available. We've of course gone through lots of other data types. We've talked about numbers and strings and so forth. Functions are another type of value. We'll look a little bit more at that here in a little bit. And of course functions do have their very own data type. Whenever we're going to use a function in JavaScript, we have to first provide what's called a function definition. This is basically the layout of the function telling JavaScript what it is that it's supposed to do whenever we ask to have that function called. There are actually two different ways that we can write function definitions in JavaScript. The first way is the way I call the classical way, not especially because it's older in JavaScript, but because it's more traditional in that it more closely resembles the way that functions are typically written in other languages. Whenever we want to write a function definition using this particular style, what we always do is we start off with the keyword function. The keyword function is then followed by a name for that function. The name of a custom function is basically just something we make up. The only rules for the names of functions are the same rules that we've already talked about for variables. So basically they can be as long as we want them to be. They should not contain any special characters other than maybe an underscore. And they should always start with a letter, never start with a number, although numbers can be other characters in the name, just not at the very beginning. After we've put in the keyword function and the function's name, the next thing we put in is a set of parentheses. We'll find that the parentheses are the things that really sort of denotes that a function is a function. When the parentheses are used, JavaScript knows that we're declaring a function. When some other times when the parentheses are used, that's how JavaScript knows to actually call the function, to actually execute whatever code it contains. After the parentheses, we next put in a set of curly braces. Now these curly braces denote what's called the function's body. Basically, inside those curly braces, we put in whatever JavaScript statements we would like. It can be very few, it could be a great many, although it's typically best to try and keep your functions relatively short. But more or less what will happen is whenever we call the function by its name, whatever statements we have inside the function's body between the curly braces is what will actually execute. It's of course these statements that are supposed to carry out whatever task it is that this function should perform. The other way we have of declaring a function, of defining a function, is slightly different. This second way actually starts off with the function's name. We then assign to that function's name, like it was a variable, which in essence it is, a function. So we start off with function name equals, followed by just the keyword function, followed by our parentheses, the curly braces, and the function's body. We'll find that in certain circumstances in JavaScript, this will end up being the way that we pretty much have to declare our functions. And we typically use this particular style when the function is going to be attached or stored in a variable that's a little bit more than just a normal variable. We'll get into that quite a bit more when we talk about objects and events. Whenever it comes time to actually activate a function, that process is called calling a function, and to do it we simply use a function's name followed by a set of parentheses. That statement by itself is an expression. It will call the function. Whatever the function is supposed to do, basically whatever statements are inside the function's body, will execute at that point in our code where we call it. So when we actually put in the call, the function name followed by parentheses, JavaScript will at that point actually go and find the function definition that has to have been written previously and will execute whatever statements are in its body. Okay, let's take a look at some very simple functions here, just to kind of get a hang of how we're going to write these things. For starters, whenever we declare a function or define a function, we'll of course have to do that inside a set of script tags. Since all the JavaScript we write has to go in script tags, that hopefully kind of goes without saying. But the question with functions is, where do we put the script tags? Well, typically, we're going to do something a little bit different here than we've done previously, in that we're going to put our script tags inside the head section. The reason we do that is because it's important that the browser read the definition of our function before it gets to the point in our code where we actually try to call the function. If we try to call a function before that function has actually been read by the browser won't know what to do. So it's important that we get the function read before it actually is going to be used. So usually, to make that simpler, what we do is we put our actual function definitions in the head section, seeing as how the times when we actually call the function will often be below that in the body somewhere. So let me start here by making a simple function. I'm going to call this the say hello function, or the eHello, or something like that. There we go. Say hello. So I started off with a keyword function, like I mentioned before, and the name of the function that I chose this time is say_hello, followed by a set of parentheses. I'm not going to pass any values to this particular function or return values from it. Let's just start off with the simplest kind of function we can write. So what I'm going to do here inside this function is I'm just going to put inside it a document.writeLine, where I'm going to print out the word hello, followed by a break. And that's basically it. It's not a very interesting function by itself, but it is sufficient. It will be able to kind of let us see the details of how we write one and how we're going to actually call it. If I come down here to the body section now and I put in a set of script tags, I can activate or call that function just by putting in its name, say hello, followed by a set of parentheses. That's pretty much all it's going to take. If I go ahead then switch over to my browser and reload this page, I can see that sure enough, at the point where I called the function's body executed, so it executed the document.writeLine. Just like if I had typed document.writeLine hello break, this line here, right here instead of calling the function. All right. We can call functions multiple times, so if I were to call it a second time, pull it up in my browser, you can see that it'll execute multiple times. And every time that I call a function, it will execute from the place where it's actually called. So if down here in the body, I actually put in a document.writeLine, and I said something else, and then I called say hello again. Can't seem to spell hello today. Right? When I actually pull that up in the browser, I get hello, hello, something else, and then hello again at the end there. So the first two hellos were, of course, from my first two calls to the hello function. It then executed my document.writeLine and printed something else, and then it called the say hello function one more time. Right? That's pretty much all there is to it. Maybe just to clean up the output a little bit, I'll go ahead and throw a break on the end of something else, which I neglected to do previously. Just to show you the other way of writing a function, the other thing we could do here is we could declare a variable. I'll call this variable, say, goodbye, and I could assign to that variable a function. Right? So this is sort of the second way, the kind of alternate syntax way of being able to write a function. In this particular function, as you can probably guess, I'm going to do a document.writeLine where I'm going to print out goodbye, followed by a break. Okay? Now, with that done, even though the function is declared a different way, I can still call it exactly the same way. Typing the name of the function. In this case, you might think of it as being the variable name that contains the function. and putting a set of parentheses after it. When I pull that up in my browser, there's my goodbye. So it works more or less exactly the same way, just with a slight difference in the way that the function is actually declared or defined. There's really no difference between these two different ways of creating a function. It's just kind of taking advantage of a slightly different way of writing it. In the first way we wrote the function, in essence what really happened was that JavaScript created a variable called sayHello and stored the actual function inside that variable. In the second way of writing it, the same thing happened. It was just a little bit more explicit in that that's what was actually happening. A variable, in this case called sayGoodbye, was being declared and a function was being stored inside it. So the two are really pretty interchangeable, but we'll find that there's lots of situations where the second way, the second syntax, is actually a little bit more convenient for getting things done the way that we actually want to get it done. Just to show you one other quick little detail about this, if I were to come down and do a document.writeLine and were to use the type of function, a built-in function that we've played with a little bit previously. I'm going to go ahead and throw a break on the end because maybe I'll put something else after it, I don't know. If I were to say, for example, put the name of a function here as the thing that I want to find the type of, when I look at that in my browser, you can see that the type of, the actual data type of the variable called sayHello is function. So function is a data type, just like number is a data type or string is a data type. If I were to do the exact same thing and were to put in my sayGoodbye function, name, okay, then it comes back and again tells me that that one's a function. So again, as I was saying, it doesn't really matter which of the two ways that we declare the function. It's really just a matter of which one's more convenient given what we're trying to write at any particular time. The same thing happens in both cases. A variable is created, sayHello or sayGoodbye, and the actual function itself is assigned as the value for that particular variable. So that's kind of fun. I might also point out here real quickly sort of the magic of the parentheses. The parentheses themselves are what tell JavaScript that we actually want the function stored inside a variable to execute. So sayGoodbye here, for example, is just a variable that contains a function. So how does JavaScript know whether we're talking about the value of that variable or if we actually want the value, the function itself, to execute? Well, it's the parentheses that actually tell it that. Down here, when I ask for the type of sayHello and sayGoodbye, you notice that I purposefully left the parentheses off the end of what we might call the variable name or the function name. The reason I did that was because I wanted type of to actually look at the value of the sayHello or the sayGoodbye variables, not the value that was being returned from them. If I were to do the same thing again with sayHello, for example, and I were to put the parentheses there, then when we pull that up in the browser, you can see that the type we get back is actually undefined. We also got back this hello in here. What happened in that particular case was because the parentheses were at the end of sayHello, JavaScript executed the function, which is why we got the hello here in our output. The value that was actually then returned by that function was undefined, which is what type of then told us the type of. The type of undefined is undefined. So, good stuff. Functions get a lot more interesting in that they have the ability to have values passed to them. Values passed to a function are basically values that the function will then be able to work with inside its body in order to be able to perform its task, whatever that happens to be. Whenever we want to pass values to a function, what we do is we provide variable names inside the parentheses. We can put in as many or as few variable names as we happen to need there inside the parentheses. Some functions won't be passed anything, in which case the parentheses will simply be empty. If a function needs to be passed a single value, then we'll put in just one variable, no comma. Anytime we're going to pass multiple values to a function, we'll put in multiple variable names, each one of them separated by a comma. Whatever values then end up being stored inside those variables will be available to the JavaScript statements inside the function's body. So for example, if we had a variable called x that we had assigned a value of 10 to, we could call our imaginary function here by putting in the function's name followed by its parentheses, and inside the parentheses we could then provide as many values as we have variables to store them. So here in this one, as a first parameter or argument it would be called, I put in the variable x, so the value of x will be passed to the function. will become a value that the function can then use. As a second argument or parameter, I then pass in the string literal hello. So we can pass in literals, we can pass in variables, just so long as there's some value there. Anytime we call a function and we pass it values, what JavaScript will do is it will take the values that we pass to the function when we call it, and it will assign those values to the variables that we've supplied. So the value of x will be put into the variable that here I've called variable1, var1, and the value of hello will be stored in the variable called var2. Okay, picking up where we left off with the last example, I've basically just resaved my file here under a different name, but otherwise I have exactly the same thing that we had before. If we take a look at the output in the browser, you can see at the moment nothing has really changed. And of course what we had was our say hello and say goodbye functions, which we were calling multiple times and looking at different values associated with them. Before we get started with passing values to these functions, I'm going to clean up my output here just a little bit. I'm going to get rid of the type of say goodbye, since we know it's going to be function the same as say hello. And I am going to add down here a little bit more to these last two document.write lines. With this one, I'm going to append a string to the beginning of the type of say hello, where I'm going to have it first say, let's have it say type of say hello function, like that. And then down here below, where I'm doing the type of the value returned from say hello, I'm going to append in there type of say hello return. There we go. Take a look at that in my browser. I can see that's what I end up with. I end up with all my sort of pseudo-random output here from the beginning, from when we were playing with it. Hello, hello, something else, hello again, goodbye. And then the type of the say hello function is function. The type of the say hello return is currently undefined. So let's take a look at actually passing some values to these different functions. If we're going to pass a value to these functions, like say for example I wanted to pass somebody's name to the say hello function so that I could have the function actually say hello to them by name, then what I would probably first need to do is I would need to provide a variable here inside the parentheses when I declare the say hello function to store whatever value is going to be given to this function. So since it's a name that I'm going to pass, the variable name that I'm going to put in here, I'm just going to make name. Hopefully that won't be too confusing. In the output that this function is then creating, what I'm going to do is I'm going to append in the value of that name variable. Let me add a space in here, so that the output will then be hello followed by a space and then whatever name it was that we passed to this function. Okay. Now, if I come back down to my body, whenever I call the say hello function, what I can do is I can pass a value to it. I could say hello to Victrola, for example. Yep, Victrola. There we go. Boy, I'm not spelling well today. The values that I pass to functions don't necessarily have to be string literals like that one was. I could have a variable, call it maybe customer, and I could have a string value assigned to customer, let's say Bernard, and then I could pass the value of that variable, customer, to my say hello function. Let's see, this other say hello I have in here I don't suppose I really need for anything in particular, so let me go ahead and just take that out. And for this one down here, maybe I'll just pass a string literal to it. I'm going through all these different say hellos and making sure I pass a value to them, because if I don't, we'll get an error. If a function is expecting a value to be passed and no value is passed, then the function of course will not be terribly happy about that. So down here, let's say hello to Victrola again. Alright, let's take a look at the output in the browser. You can see that it's now working just fine. I get hello Victrola, hello Bernard. Let's just look at those two statements here real quick. Right? The first one, say hello Victrola right here, what's actually happening of course is the value of Victrola, the string literal, is being passed up here to my say hello function and stored in my name variable. So when the function then carries out its action, does its document.write line, okay, it prints out hello space followed by the value of the name variable, which is of course the value that was passed, Victrola. Okay. Same basic thing happens here in our second statement. I have my customer variable called Bernard. Okay. When I then say hello to that customer, I pass the customer variable. It's actually the value of that variable that we're referring to here, since there's no quotes around it. So the value of that variable Bernard is what gets passed up here to the say hello function and stored here in my variable name. So then once again, when the function executes, it prints out hello space followed by the name, which in that case is Bernard. So I end up with hello Victrola and hello Bernard. Most everything else in here is basically the same. We do have the hello Victrola in here that's being produced by this very last type of say hello document.writeLine that I had put together. But really that's about it. If I wanted to pass a second value to my functions, here maybe we'll play with the say goodbye function. Maybe I want to pass a prefix that goes with a name to who we're going to say goodbye to. Since there are two variables, two values that I want to pass to the function in this case, I put in two variables to store those two values separated by a comma. And it's important that I remember the order that I actually put them in, because the order that I pass the values to needs to match the order of those variables. So here when we say goodbye, what I'll do is again I will append in this time the prefix, maybe followed by a period and a space, and then maybe that will then be followed by the name, something along those lines. Hopefully I got all the spaces in there the way that I need them. The way I can use that then is when I call my say goodbye function right here, I could pass in a prefix like Mr. Okay? And then follow that with maybe a name. Let's see, what name do we want to use this time? Jones, let's just say. When I take a look at this in my browser then, my goodbye statement becomes goodbye Mr. period Jones. So Mr., because it's the first value that's passed, gets stored in the prefix variable. Jones, the second value that's passed, gets stored in the name variable. I append that those pieces of data all together along with the string literal goodbye and the break, and we end up with the output that we want. And just like, of course, when we were passing single values to our functions, if I had some of these values stored in variables, that would be just fine too. If I had var p equals Mr. and let's say var n equals Jones, and then I pass those two variables instead, p and n, then the output ends up being exactly the same way, and exactly the same thing. So it doesn't really matter where those values come from, just so long as there are some values that are being passed to the function when the function expects them. And here, this of course is kind of a silly example, like most of the examples are at this level, but these values could be things that were read in from a form, or at this point maybe something that we gathered by prompting the user with the prompt statement. Pretty much anything, any way we want to put it together. Besides being able to pass values to functions, functions also have the ability to return values. Now, anytime we don't specifically ask a function to return a value, the value it returns will always be undefined. But there might be times when we want a function to actually produce some value that it will then give back to the call, to the statement that actually called the function. When we want that to happen, what we do is we use the keyword return as the very last statement inside the function. If we put in the keyword return by itself, then nothing will be returned, the function will simply end. But when we use the keyword return, we'll more typically use it followed by a value. Whatever value follows the keyword return will then be the value that the function gives back to the statement that actually called it. So for example, here we call the function by its name, followed by the parentheses, of course. The function will execute, and whatever value the function returns in this statement will then be assigned to the variable that I've declared called x. Okay, next let's take a look at writing functions that not only take values but also return values. Let's say, for example, that we're working on a page where a user is able to select products and add them to some type of collection, sort of like to a shopping cart, for example. And on this page, what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to be able to use JavaScript to be able to show the user how much money they are actually going to owe if they place that final order. So to get started, let's start by just putting some script tags here inside the body section. And let's say that some of the values we're going to be working with are the cost of a particular item. So let's make up an item here and say that we have a cost of $10. Let's say that there's always going to be a markup that we add to all of the different items. Let's say that our markup is 25%. And let's say that there's also, of course, a tax rate, always taxes, that is also going to have to be calculated into the cost or the price of the item or whatever it is that the user is going to end up owing on their order. If we wanted to just take those values and turn them into sort of a final total for a particular product, some of the steps we would probably need to go through is let's start by making a new variable. Let's call it price. And let's say that the price is basically our cost for the product plus our markup. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take our cost in the cost variable. I'm going to multiply it by the markup. That, of course, will give me a relatively small number, basically just what the actual markup will be on that item. And then I'm going to add that back to the original cost. So that ends up giving me the price. And maybe just so we can kind of keep track of what's going on here, let's go ahead and do a document write line. Boy, there we go. Let's go ahead and print out what our price is and a break. So if I take a look at that in my browser, it's telling me that the actual price of the item is going to be $12.50. There's, of course, no dollar sign there, and the cents part of it isn't 2 digits the way that currency is usually shown, but that's basically just string formatting. That's something that we can mess with in a later episode, but $12.50 is basically what the user will be charged for that particular product. If we then wanted to go on and include the tax rate, the tax cost into the final price that the user is going to pay, I'm going to make another variable. I'm going to call it price with tax. And to get that one, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the actual price, which includes the markup. I'm going to multiply it by the tax rate, which will tell us basically just what the tax is on that particular item with its markup, and then I will add that back to the price again. So that should end up giving us the price with tax, and just again, to kind of keep track of what we're doing, let's go ahead and print out the price with tax so we can see what that is, and it comes out to $13.50. So sounds about right. You can pull out your trusty calculator if you don't trust it, but that should be basically the idea. Now, if we were doing this kind of thing on a page, there's probably going to be multiple different places where this is going to need to take place. Say, for example, that the user has added 3 different items to their cart. We're going to want to figure out the price of each one of those items individually to be able to show them what each of them costs inside their cart. And we'll also want to, of course, figure out a total. Now, there are different places where we might think about including tax or not including tax, but for now I'm going to assume that it's just kind of one product and we're just going to throw the tax in there to make it a little bit more interesting. But anyway, there would still be multiple places on a page where this calculation would need to be done, and it seems like kind of a lot of work to actually have these pieces of code, these calculations, multiple places within our page. And it could be really tough to keep up with something like this, especially if we change how we handle our markup, for example. Like for right now, I have our markup set as a fraction, 25%. But what if later a business decision leads us to decide that we want to have it stored as an actual percentage here within the page, 25 instead of 0.25? That would make a big difference in all of these different calculations, and I would have to go back through all my JavaScript, all of this code, all of these formulas, these expressions, all the different places they are on a page, and make sure that they are all updated to reflect the way that that number has changed. So what would overall be a very much better idea, that's an interesting phrase, what would be a much better idea would be if I actually took this calculation and had it all actually stored in a function. That way I would be able to call the function anytime I happen to need it on the page, and I would have the actual calculations themselves stored in just one place, so that if a change ever does need to be made to it in the future, or if a problem is found, there'll only be one place in the code I'll have to go back to later to be able to correct that problem or make that change. So let me come back up here to the head section, throw in a set of script tags, and here let me go ahead and create a new function. I'm going to call it find price, let's say. To be able to find the price, this particular function is going to need three different values to work with. It's going to need the cost, it's going to need the markup, and it's going to need, let's say, the tax. Okay? What I can do then is down here in the body, I'm no longer going to need those three variables specifically. I'm not going to need these document.write lines anymore, which basically just leaves us with these two calculations here. I could go ahead and take those two, cut them out, and I'll drop them up here into my function. So something like that. So now cost, markup, and tax are all values that will be passed to this function. These two statements inside the function will then actually take those values and, like we were doing before, work them together so that we end up with a final price with tax. Now, the question then becomes, what do we actually do with that value once we've found it? It's certainly possible at this point that we could just do a document.write line right here for it, but that would be a fairly limited use because there will be certain times, yes, when we do want to print it out to make it part of the output on the page to show it to the user, but there'll probably also be times when we want to incorporate that in maybe to another calculation, like finding a total of all of the products in the cart. So what would be much better here would be for us to actually return the value. So I could say return price with tax, which means that whatever the value of that return with tax variable is, that particular value will become the return value of our function. Oops, which I forgot some of, didn't I? I was going to write this the other way. This needs to be var find price equals function. There we go. Boy, that would have been a stumper. Trying to figure out what I had done wrong when this didn't all work. Okay, but anyway, there we go. What I can do now that we have that as a return value from our function is back down in the body. If I were to, for example, do document.write line, and I were to say find price, and then I pass that function some values, I'll use the same values we were using before so we know what to look for with the output. There we go, $10 for the cost, 25% markup, and 8% sales tax. If I pull that up in my browser now, okay, there it is. You can see that the function performed the work just the way that the lines did when they were written individually, except now that it's a function, it is reusable and more easy to maintain. Maybe I'll go ahead and throw a break on here, okay, and we could actually then go and we could find the price with tax of some other product. So I could say find price for something that costs $435, has a 15% markup, and the tax rate, let's say, is still 8%. And there we can see that the price with tax would be $540.27. So having the function kind of encapsulates and makes dealing with that much easier, and having the function actually return the value makes it even easier still, makes the function much more flexible, so there's different ways we can use it. The way, of course, that I'm using it here is that I am calling the function first here in this statement. So the function executes, it's passed its values, it finds the price with tax, it then returns the price with tax that it finds. That return value then takes the place of what I have highlighted right here and basically becomes part of the output that's being given to the document.write line statement, which is then followed with the break. Same thing here on the line below. Okay. Let me go ahead and throw another break in here, and let me show you one other neat little detail. If we do another document.write line, there we go. And this time let's do a type of, just to kind of say that we did. If I call find price again, I'll say a product that costs $1 that has 0% markup and let's say 1% tax. Numbers don't really matter here, we're not even going to actually see them. If I take a look at that in my browser, the return value, the type of the value that we get back there is number. So what's of course actually happening in that case is we first call the find price function, pass it its values, it does its calculation, and returns the price with tax. That price that's actually returned then, that value that's actually returned, is what's then given to the type of function. The type of function looks at that and sees that that is data type number. The string that's then returned from type of is what we then actually give to the document.write line. So in our browser we end up with number being returned. calling a function from within a function from within a function is more or less what's actually happening here. And it's a very sort of common pattern in JavaScript, something that we'll actually do pretty frequently. JavaScript contains many built-in functions. There's a good number of them, so many that I wouldn't even attempt to try and make a list of all of them here. But more or less, built-in functions are called the exact same way as custom functions. All built-in functions will have a name. Some of them will be passed values. Some of them will return values. We'll take a look at a couple of them. Okay. The next thing let's do is go and take a look at some of the built-in functions in JavaScript. There's really not a whole lot to say right here, right now. Some of the built-in functions in JavaScript are things that we've actually already discussed. For example, we have discussed already the, let's say, the alert function. We've discussed the prompt function. What else have we talked about? Seems like there's been a number of others. Oh yeah, type of course, we were just using in the last example. And a handful of others. There's lots of different functions along those lines that are just built into JavaScript and are available for us whenever we happen to need them, wherever we happen to need them. Some of them take values, like of course alert, prompt, and type of are all passed a single value. Some of them return values, like prompt, for example, always returns whatever the user entered. Type of always returns whatever the type of, the data type is of whatever it's passed. So there's lots of these sorts of functions floating around, and instead of trying to put together any kind of comprehensive list of them, we'll just kind of tackle them as they become useful to us. There is one other little function in here that kind of belongs to the alert and prompt family that I wanted to go ahead and show you. It might occasionally come in handy for you. This other function is called the confirm function. Okay? What the confirm function will actually do is, like alert and prompt, it will actually pop up a dialog box which the user can then respond to. For example, let me pull up a confirm here and have it say, do you agree? If I look at that in my browser, this is what the confirm box actually looks like. You can see that the string that I passed to it is shown as a prompt, sort of, on the dialog box itself. But unlike the prompt, instead of giving the user just a text field where they can type something in, instead what we end up with here is we end up with a cancel and an OK button, which of course will probably look a little bit different in your browser if you're not using a Mac and Safari, but the idea will still basically be there. Now, whenever we click either cancel or OK, what will happen is our confirm will actually return a Boolean value, either true or false, which we can then look at in our JavaScript code to determine which one of those two buttons the user actually pressed. So let's put this together into another goofy little example. Let's make a new function of our own, a new custom function. I'm of course going to put it up here in the head section. I'm going to call this function go to site. Okay. And I'm going to set this function up, actually let me declare it this way, so that it's going to be passed a URL. Alright. Now what I'm going to want it to do is, if the user says OK to confirm, I'm going to want this function to actually redirect the browser to a different website. Redirection isn't something that we've discussed yet, but it's actually very easy. If we do document.location.href, if we assign a URL to that well, it's actually a property of an object, which we'll talk about later, but let's say variable for right now. If we assign a URL to it, that will actually instruct the browser to go to that particular URL. But what I'm going to want to do here is I'm going to not want it to just always go straight to that URL. Instead, what I'm going to want it to do is I'm going to want it to first confirm with the user that we really want to go to that URL. So I'm going to want to use a confirm here, where I'm going to ask the user, are you sure you want to go to, and then I'll append in the URL, whatever that happens to be. All right, now the confirm box itself is actually going to return a value. So I'm going to make a new variable here. I'm going to call it answer, basically the user's answer to the question. As a matter of fact, since it's a question, let me throw a question mark there on the end of it. What I could then do is I could use that with my ternary operator, my conditional operator, to determine whether we're actually going to do the redirection or not. So I could say something like answer question mark. So the value of the answer variable, either true or false, is going to determine what's going to happen in this statement. If the answer is true, then what I'm going to want to do is execute this statement, document.location.href equals URL. If it isn't true, then what I'm going to want to do is pretty much nothing. I have to put something here in this position, so let me just put in an empty string, which will just be a value. It won't actually end up having any effect whatsoever. So that's my little go-to site function. So now let me come back down here to the body and let me prompt the user. Let's say, what site do you want to visit? Something along those lines. As we've seen from before, the prompt statement, of course, is going to pop up a dialog box. The user will have the option of typing in some value. Whatever value they type in is the value that the prompt will actually return. Well, what I'm going to do here, just to be fancy, is I'm going to take and call my goToSite function, and where I would normally put just the URL, that's where I'm actually going to put the prompt statement. So again, here is sort of a layering of different functions. What will happen here first is that the prompt will execute, since it's in the innermost set of parentheses, so based on the order of operation, it will execute first. So the prompt will pop up, it'll ask the user what site they want to visit, they'll type in a URL, hopefully, we won't deal with that complication right now. Whatever URL they type in will then be returned, will take the place of what I have highlighted here, and will actually then become the value that's passed to my goToSite function. So my goToSite function then will receive that URL and store it here in its variable called URL, where it will then try to confirm with the user, are you sure you want to go to, and it'll append in the value of that URL. The user will then either click OK or cancel, so my variable called answer will end up with either true or false stored in it. We then check with that answer variable if the value of answer is a true value. If it has truthiness, then we will do a document.location.href and assign the URL to it, which will cause the browser to redirect. If, on the other hand, answer is false, we will come to after the colon, and we will end up with just an empty string there. The empty string is not being assigned, it doesn't really do anything on its own, so more or less just nothing will happen. So let's give that a try and see how that works. If I come over and reload that in my browser, there's my prompt. What site do you want to visit? Let me put in a URL here. Let's say we want to go to Google. Okay. I'll click OK, and now it's saying, are you sure you want to go to that URL? So that's my confirm. If I hit OK, well, how funny that for my particular example, Google was so slow coming up. There we go. It did come up eventually, though. All right, so it worked just fine. I'm going to go ahead and hit back and reload, and it asked me if I wanted what site I want to visit. So let me try Google again. Oops. There we go. I hit OK. This time the confirm comes up. I can choose OK or cancel. If I hit cancel, then nothing happens. Okay. So there we go. That's another one of the built-in functions that's available in JavaScript, the confirm function. Can occasionally come in handy. I would say that in real use, I probably use confirm considerably more than I actually use prompt or alert. Alert I use for debugging purposes in the real world, but confirm is one that actually does come in handy, and often I use it for kind of exactly the same thing that we're using it for here, letting the user confirm that some link that they've clicked or some action that they've taken should actually take place. When you're working with database-driven apps, for example, you don't want the user to accidentally click on a delete link that wipes out a record without maybe first giving them a chance to explain, I guess, that they didn't really mean to do that. So it can actually end up being a very, very handy little built-in function. just for the thrill of it, what if we wanted to go ahead and solve the one last little glitch that we really have here in this, this little example? This little glitch is that what happens if the user, when asked what site they want to visit, either enters nothing or just hits cancel? Well, you can see that what happens right now is that we still go ahead and call our function, except the value for the URL that was passed to the function is null. So if we then hit OK, the whole thing kind of messes up and weird things happen. So that's not great. If we wanted to actually fix this, what I would probably do is I would come down, and I'm actually going to at this point separate the prompt and the call for my go-to-site function. I'm going to do that because the testing that I'm going to need to do here with my conditional operator to make sure that there's actually a decent value there is going to make this all a little bit more complicated. And at that point, I think I'm completely justified in splitting this into multiple statements. So I'm going to make a new variable down here. I'm going to call it site. I could have called it URL, but I don't like to be any more confusing with my variable names than I have to be. But more or less, my site variable here will end up either having in it null if the user hits cancel, an empty string if they hit OK but don't enter anything, or it might actually have a URL in it. So what I could do with that then is I could come down and start putting a conditional statement together with that. I could say basically if site is truthy, if it has an actual string in it more or less, if it's not an empty string or null, then what I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to go to that particular site. So I'll pass the site variable as my parameter to my go-to-site function. If they didn't do anything at all, then what I could do is just put in, again like I did above, an empty string, which will have no effect, won't actually end up doing anything. So it's sort of a way for me to just keep anything from happening if site is falsy. So let's see how that actually works. If I come back to my browser and hit refresh, if I hit cancel, simply nothing happens, no error like we got before. If I hit refresh and just click OK, again, nothing happens, no error. That's good. And if I actually then go through the process of putting in a URL, let's go to ingenio.us.com, one of my class websites, and I hit OK, then it goes ahead and passes that into the function. The function's confirming it. If I hit cancel, nothing happens. Okay. If I do it one more time, Ingenio, can't even spell my own domain name about half the time. I hit OK. It wants to confirm, do I really want to go there? I hit OK. Everything works just fine. Off to the website we go. So that looks like that solves the one last little glitch that we may have had in that example.